Later on, the congregation members said they had had weird nightmares and had woken up with all these strange marks on their bodies, bruises they didn't know where they came from, had nosebleeds, and eventually an implant came out of the nose. Now, what are these implants? Well, they can be any number of things. They can be little metallic beads. They can be little cylinders. They can be almost organic looking. They're usually very, very tiny. They're much tinier. You've all, I'm sure, seen these things about these RFID chips and, embedded chips and all of that where they're, they're pretty small, but these things are much smaller. And what we tell people to do is pray and ask the Holy Spirit to remove these things, either by destroying them or by having the body expel them. And in most cases, either the person wakes up, there's blood on the pillow, and there's this little tiny thing there, either metallic or of indeterminate origin, or it emerges out of their body, like they get this weird sore or welt somewhere, and then the next couple of days out comes this strange-looking thing. And this is an actual implant that was recovered. Now, you don't do it, oddly enough, we actually went to a biology department at a local college and got this blown up, because actually it's smaller than a sesame seed. And the first thing I thought was, it looks like a chicken McNugget. But what's funny is, and I don't know if you can even see this on the screen, but up in the upper left, there are a couple of little black things. Now, this implant is 20 years old. It came out of a Christian 20 years ago. There's two little black things, and those little black things were originally, they had little tentacles coming out of them, little kind of feeler thingies, and those broke off over the years. I mean, because they were very, very tiny, and I'm sure once this thing was out of the body, it kind of, dried up like any organism would. But I asked the guy at the I said, what is this? And he says, well, he said, bleeped if I know. That was his candid answer. He said, I've never seen anything like this. He magnified it even further. He said, it's not a seed. It appears to be a biological thing, but yet it's not. So, anyhow, that's a real live implant. I tried to find another one, but we're in the process of repacking stuff, and I couldn't locate it. But this is one of two that we actually have. Now, back to the question. Am I an abductee? Well, first of all, some of you may have heard this, but I'll say it again. We had the thing where I was studying with the Archdruid, the Grand Master Druid of North America, down in Arkansas. Sharon and I were down there, and every night we'd be on the mountaintop sitting at a picnic table learning all these weird things about how to, be a druid. And about half the nights we were there, especially it was clear, this UFO would come sailing in, quiet as can be, and hover over the mountaintop for the entire class. And it was like 200 feet above us. I mean, I could actually look up, and so could the other people, and see windows in the thing. And sometimes we'd see little weird figures walking around in those windows, and sometimes they'd even go like this, And then when the class was over, just as silent as a whisper, it would, glide away. And it wasn't like a dirigible or something, because we could see the stars beyond it. It was sort of basically cigar-shaped. And, this druid who was teaching us would never say what it was. He wouldn't comment on it. We'd talk about it among ourselves, but none of us had the nerve to ask him because he wouldn't say anything. And then there's a time in Wauwatosa a few years later when I was told by my spirit guides to go out in the middle of January at midnight when it was like 20 below zero and walk through this park by the Menominee River, I think it was. And, I walked there, and this brilliantly colored oval thing came down out of the sky. It looked like a thing of pure light. And it came very, like within 100 feet of me, and then all of a sudden it just, like that, enveloped me. And the next thing I know, I was inside of this thing. But this wasn't your typical abduction experience by any means. I was standing there before like this panel of 5 or 6 some things. I mean, some of them looked perfectly human. They said they had kind of strange robes on, but some of them looked very non-human. And the odd thing is that they started asking me questions. And they were mainly asking me questions about masonry. Now, isn't that interesting? And they wanted to know how well I knew the Masonic catechism I'd been taught. And so I actually had to give this back and forth thing that Masons are required to learn before they go up to the next level of the lodge. And then, at the end of it, there was no further comment. The next thing I know, I'm laying on my back in the snow in this park in Wauwatosa, and it's about an hour and a half later. And I was just a little bit cold, so I knew I hadn't been laying there the whole time, or I would have been half frozen. Then the other thing is that I was drawn so quickly and so deeply into Enochian and Thelemic magic. And these are two very advanced kinds of magic that involve, how shall I put this, transspatial relationships, where you are opening up doorways into other dimensions, and you're inviting beings from other dimensions through. And some of these beings were pretty scary. All I can tell you is one time my wife and I and some of our coven members, we went down to the shores of Lake Michigan in the middle of the night when the moon was full, and we did a call to Cthulhu. Now, Cthulhu is one of the great old gods of the Trans-Yugathian magical system, and, you know, this thing came up out of the sea that was taller than a skyscraper. And if you want to know what it looked like, pretty darn close, you can stand the movie. There's this movie that just came out recently on video called Hellboy. And in the end of that movie, they have this thing that comes through, and I tell you, it's about 80% similar to the thing we conjured up out of Lake Michigan. And supposedly this is a god from another dimension, who is far older than the god of our dimension, which of course is bunk, but that's the story. So, I mean, you know, that kind of magical stuff was very, very potent. We would actually look through these rips in the fabric of time and see galaxies and see other dimensions. Then I think many of you have heard the story of my being taken to one of the moons of Saturn out of my bedroom back in Iowa when I was probably in my late 20s, and taken into this place called the Cathedral of Pain, where Lucifer came to me and put a talon right through the middle of my third eye and left a scar, which is still visible to this day, and told me I belonged to him forever. Then I was cast out of that cathedral, which was a horrible place, back down to earth in a pillar of fire, landed in the backyard of my home. Fortunately, it was summertime, no clothing on. I landed in the backyard with a blaze of fire, and there was a ring of burning fire in the lawn around me. And so people say, were you doing drugs? Well, yes, but not at that particular evening. And it's hard to explain, you know, drugs when you got, you know, like this, like meteor crater in your backyard. I'm glad I left early that morning before my folks got up and said, what happened in the backyard, you know? And then there was the fact that both Sharon and I, when we were driving out to Utah to be married in the temple for time and all eternity, we were continually buzzed by UFOs, especially once we got into the Utah desert. Because let me tell you, you get out in those deserts, like Utah and Nevada, Four Corners region, Arizona, New Mexico, there's some very strange stuff out there, really strange. The Panamint Mountains, some of those regions. I mean, even the Native American people for centuries have reported, you know, that there are strange things going on within those mountains. That brings us to underground bases. How's that for a smooth segue? A key component of understanding how all this fits into the end time plan is the idea that there has been a collusion between our government and the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. Treaties were entered by the Eisenhower administration back in the 1950s, where deals were made that basically we would get a lot of advanced technology from these aliens, stuff like, you know, Velcro and Teflon and, you know, microchips or whatever. And it is interesting